The massive warship Azarath drifted like a shadow through the cold expanse of the galaxy. Its gleaming exterior reflected the harsh light of distant stars, a silent testament to the Apex Dominion's might. Inside, the training halls were filled, with the hum of power-suited cadets, many of them genetically enhanced and boasting extraordinary abilities. Here, every individual was a weapon, honed to perfection, a product of 1,000 years of ruthless evolution and conquest. The Apex Dominion was a well-oiled machine built on pride, power, and the belief that no species could challenge their superiority. The arrival of a single human cadet was nothing short of a curiosity, a minor ripple in the otherwise perfectly controlled universe of the Dominion's military. Alara Ellie Carson stood at the threshold of the training arena, her booted feet making no sound against the polished metal floors. Her uniform, a simple yet well-fitted black combat suit, seemed almost plain compared to the ornate, battle-worn armor of the other cadets. She didn't look out of place in the sense of her stature. At 5 feet 6 inches, she was of average height by human standards, but compared to the towering alien cadets with massive muscular builds, she seemed almost fragile. Yet, Ellie exuded something more potent than physical strength, an unsettling calm that hung in the air around her. The cadets eyed her as she walked past, whispers catching in the air. Some of them snickered under their breath, already dismissing her as another weak human, foolish enough to think they could compete in this arena of giants. Ellie's reputation had preceded her, though, a small rumor circulating that she'd survived the brutal selection process, a feat that had claimed the lives of stronger beings from other species. Still, survival didn't equal strength, and her quiet demeanor made her a target for mockery. The senior instructors, however, didn't share the same contempt. They observed her with cold, clinical interest, as if they were studying a rare specimen. After all, the Apex Dominion had never seen a human cadet before. Most humans they encountered were scattered among countless lesser species, surviving at the edges of the galaxy. They were small, weak, insignificant, but Ellie was something else. Report to the Central Training Hall. The stern voice of Instructor Karishi, a Ithar, a 7-foot-tall alien with spiny blue skin, commanded over the loudspeakers. You will undergo the basic evaluation protocols. His tone was cold, with an underlying sense of amusement. Ellie nodded, her expression unreadable. No words, no hesitation. She simply turned and walked toward the designated room, the sound of her boots echoing louder than the whispers of the others. Behind her, the cadets continued to talk, but Ellie paid them no mind. She was accustomed to being underestimated, to being viewed as little more than a novelty. It didn't matter. What mattered was what came next. Inside the training hall, a group of elite cadets already suited up for their first drills were assembled. These were the brightest, the most dangerous, and the most lethal warriors in the galaxy. Each one had a deadly skill, telepathic control, hyper-intelligence, or brute strength, and they had been pitted against the fiercest adversaries in the Dominion's history. The moment Ellie stepped into the room, a hush fell. The cadets who had once whispered and scoffed at her presence now stood still, eyes fixed on her as though she had just entered a lion's den. Ellie walked to the center of the room and stood quietly, facing the instructors. Her back straight, her eyes locked forward. She never flinched under their gaze. For the first time in her life, the silence around her felt like the calm before a storm. And then, without warning, Instructor Qureshi addressed the room. We will begin the initiation with a simple combat drill. Pair up. The cadets eagerly shifted, looking around for their partners. A few of them shared knowing glances, eyes darting toward Ellie. Who would face her first? Ellie remained standing, her face as unreadable as ever. She was alone. The quiet resolve in her posture was the only thing that betrayed her true intent. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was here to survive. Cadet Carson, Karishi's voice rang out again, colder now, as if testing her resolve. Are you ready to begin? Her eyes met his, and for the first time, Ellie spoke. Yes. Her voice was soft, calm, but something in the way she said it made the entire room pause. The game was about to begin. This continuation builds the tension, adding layers of intrigue and foreshadowing. Ellie's silence is emphasized as both a strength and a source of curiosity, and the stage is set for the conflict to unfold. The room is now waiting for the first move. Who will break first? The atmosphere in the training hall thickened as Ellie's quiet response reverberated through the room. The cadets, who had spent years perfecting their skills, couldn't help but feel a rising sense of unease. A human, quiet, unassuming, and yet something about her presence gnawed at their confidence. It wasn't her appearance, it was the way she stood unflinching under their gaze. Unmoved. Instructor Qureshi, sensing the tension, gave a sharp nod. His voice cut through the still air. Pair up. Begin. At once the cadets broke into groups. The clashing sounds of training weapons, the snap of energy shields being activated, and the hum of kinetic power filled the room. It was a spectacle of violent elegance. But despite the chaos around her, Ellie remained standing perfectly still, her arms relaxed at her sides. She didn't even reach for the practice weapon laid out before her. The instructors, observing her lack of action, exchanged glances, some of them raising eyebrows in mild concern. "Is she waiting?" one of them whispered. Before anyone could respond, a voice rang out across the hall. "Let's test the human then," said Zorath, the Apex commander. The cadets parted like a sea, allowing the towering figure to stride into the center of the room. Zorath's reputation preceded him. He was the epitome of battle prowess, calm, calculating, and ruthless. His physique was a blend of alien physiology and military training, imposing, with thick armor plating fused to his skin pulsating with deadly energy. He was a living weapon, an apex. Ellie turned slightly as Zorath approached. The cadets watched in a mix of awe and expectation, knowing full well that no one had ever survived a training match with him, let alone defeated him. Zorath stopped just a few feet from Ellie, his crimson eyes scanning her face, taking in the soft yet determined expression. "I'll make this quick," he said, his deep voice a low growl that seemed to shake the air. "If you can survive my first move, I'll consider you worthy of training here." The statement hung in the air. The other cadets, typically composed, now found themselves watching the human in rapt attention. Was she truly going to face Zorath? Ellie didn't respond. She didn't speak. Instead, she stepped forward, her gaze locked on Zorath's. A moment of silence passed. Then Zorath smiled, a predatory grin that revealed rows of jagged teeth. "You are foolish to think you can face me," he said. In an instant he lunged. His speed was almost too fast to track, an explosive movement that closed the gap between them in less than a heartbeat. The force behind his strike was enough to crush the training weapon Ellie had barely touched, sending it flying across the room. But Ellie didn't flinch. She didn't dodge. Instead, she allowed the blow to come, letting it get closer and closer, until, just as Zorath's strike reached its peak, she moved. With a fluid, almost imperceptible shift of her body, Ellie sidestepped. She moved with a precision so exact that she didn't just avoid the strike, she redirected it. Zorath's fist, aimed for her chest, missed by inches and collided with the training floor. The ground cracked under the immense pressure. Dust flew into the air, but Ellie was already on the move, a blur of motion as she closed the distance between them. For the first time, a flicker of confusion crossed Zorath's eyes. This human wasn't like any opponent he'd ever faced. As Zorath prepared to strike again, Ellie did something no one expected. She didn't engage in a traditional combat stance. Instead, she moved like water, unpredictable, graceful, and yet somehow still lethal. The cadets watched in stunned silence as Ellie began to shift the momentum of the fight entirely. Each step she took felt deliberate, as though she was guiding Zorath into her trap. Zorath, frustrated by her lack of response, attacked again, this time with a fury meant to overwhelm. But Ellie was already ahead of him. With an almost imperceptible twist of her body, she used his own weight and speed against him. Suddenly, Zorath found himself stumbling. It wasn't an overpowering move, but a precise, well-timed maneuver that caused him to lose his footing. He grunted as he struggled to regain his balance, only to find Ellie's hand at his throat, her body poised with just the right amount of pressure to hold him in place. The room froze. Zorath, the greatest Apex commander in the galaxy, was momentarily restrained by a human cadet. His crimson eyes flared with shock and rage. His pride, so carefully nurtured over years of battle, was teetering on the edge of collapse. No one had ever done this. No one. His grip tightened instinctively, but before he could retaliate, Ellie released him with a swift push, sending him stumbling backward. Ellie didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her actions had already said everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Zorath staggered to his feet, his chest heaving with frustration. He shot a cold, seething glance at Ellie, but there was a flicker of respect in his gaze that he couldn't hide. He was not accustomed to being humbled in such a manner. Without a word, he turned away, the cadet still frozen in place, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Ellie, still silent, returned to her original position in the center of the room, the weight of her silence now more profound than ever. The rest of the cadets remained motionless, unable to process what they had just seen. A human had come into their domain and, without a single word, shattered their understanding of the hierarchy. The question echoed through their minds. What kind of human was this? And more importantly, what would they do now? This continuation ramps up the tension, showing Ellie's ability to control the flow of the fight with subtlety and technique, and introduces Zorath's growing frustration, setting the stage for the eventual psychological battle between them. The air in the WAM training hall was thick with tension. The cadets, still in stunned silence, exchanged glances. They were waiting for something, some sign of weakness, a single crack in Ellie's calm demeanor. But none came. Zorath, his pride bruised but his arrogance still intact, stood several paces away, glaring at the human cadet. His body was taut, every muscle screaming for release. His every instinct told him to attack again, to crush the human once and for all. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the eerie precision of her movements or the unsettling lack of fear in her eyes. His chest rose and fell with the deep breaths of restraint. He hadn't expected to be caught off guard. He hadn't expected to be humbled so easily. But Ellie remained still, as unflappable as before. Her calm presence seemed to amplify the weight of his frustration. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken words. The cadets, still unsure of what had just happened, waited. Would Zorath charge again? Would he lose his temper? The Apex commander clenched his fists, his fingers crackling with raw energy. His patience was wearing thin, but then unexpectedly he spoke. "You think you've won?" His voice, though low, was filled with barely contained rage. "You think a single move can undo everything I've built?" Ellie didn't respond. She never did. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. Zorath sneered, his lip curling as his eyes narrowed. He took a step forward, his boots pounding against the floor with each movement. His next words were barely a whisper, but they carried the weight of years of experience. "Let's see if you can survive my next move." The cadets shifted uneasily. They all knew what was coming. The next move wasn't just a physical attack. It was a test of endurance, of willpower. Zorath had the ability to manipulate energy fields with his mind, an ability that few could withstand. The last cadet who had faced him in a similar challenge had been broken in under 10 seconds, and Zorath had no intention of going easy on a human. Ellie, however, showed no sign of fear. Her stillness seemed almost to mock Zorath's fury. He extended his arm, palm open toward her. His body hummed with an otherworldly energy, and for a moment it seemed as though the entire room was holding its breath. Then, without warning, a burst of power shot from his hand, surging toward Ellie with terrifying speed. The energy wave tore through the air, crackling with destructive force. It was meant to overwhelm her, to shatter her resolve in an instant. But Ellie didn't flinch. She didn't move. Instead, she stepped aside with a movement so small, so deliberate, that it seemed impossible. The energy passed her by, missing her by inches as though she had predicted its exact trajectory. Zorath's eyes widened in disbelief. He had calculated every angle, every path the human could take, but she had sidestepped him. There was no raw strength in her actions, no overwhelming power. Just a quiet, focused grace that made him feel clumsy. The energy blast struck the wall behind her, leaving a gaping hole where a section of reinforced metal had once been. The cadets flinched, but Ellie didn't even glance at the destruction. She was already refocusing on Zorath, her expression unchanged. Zorath, his breath ragged, began to grow desperate. He was the Apex commander. No one had ever dodged his power like that. It was supposed to be a move that struck terror into the hearts of any opponent. But Ellie was undeterred. Her silence wasn't just a lack of words, it was the absence of fear. He lunged again, faster this time, using his superior speed to close the gap between them in an instant. This time, his body crackled with a new, darker energy, swirling with malevolent intent. He aimed a powerful strike directly at her chest, his fist glowing with an intensity that could obliterate anything it touched. But Ellie, almost casually, sidestepped him once more. This time she didn't just avoid the blow, she used his momentum against him. As Zorath's fist swung past her, she executed a swift, smooth movement that sent him spiraling off balance. The Apex commander stumbled, his armor scraping the floor as his massive frame faltered. In that split second of vulnerability, Ellie struck. She didn't punch. She didn't kick. Instead, she moved with surgical precision, pressing a single, well-timed pressure point along his shoulder, a strike that immediately neutralized his ability to control his arm. Zorath's expression twisted in pain and shock. He tried to raise his arm, but it wouldn't move. The energy he had summoned fizzled, dissipating into the air. His legs buckled under him, and for a brief, fleeting moment, he collapsed to one knee. The room was dead silent. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. The Apex commander, the champion, brought to his knees by a single human cadet using nothing more than her calm, calculated precision. Zorath gritted his teeth, his jaw clenched in pure humiliation. He had been bested by a human. Ellie took a step back, her posture still composed as though the fight had meant nothing. She gave no victory gesture, no grand display. She simply watched him struggle to regain control of his body. "Are you finished?" Ellie's voice broke the silence, soft and steady, almost clinical in its simplicity. Zorath's glare was filled with a mixture of hatred and disbelief, but there was no response. Instead, he stood slowly, his pride in tatters. He didn't look at her as he straightened, unwilling to admit defeat aloud, but the seed of doubt had been planted deep in his mind. Ellie Carson had done the unthinkable. She had broken him, and he couldn't fathom how. The room was still, but the cadets were not the same. The greatest Apex commander had been humbled by a human, and the galaxy would never look the same again. This continuation takes Zorath's arrogance to its breaking point, showing how Ellie's calm precision completely dismantles his sense of invincibility. The tension and respect between them build, and Ellie's quiet strength becomes more terrifying and awe-inspiring. Zorath, his pride shattered and his body still aching from the precise strike Ellie had delivered, stood rigidly at the center of the training hall. His breaths were ragged, his mind spinning with the impossible defeat he had just endured. The other cadets remained frozen in place, their eyes wide with disbelief. No one spoke. No one dared to make a sound. Ellie stood across from him, her posture as calm and composed as it had been from the moment she entered the hall. Her eyes never left Zorath, who, despite the humiliation, refused to meet her gaze. Instead, he stood there, the weight of his defeat pressing down on him like a suffocating force. The silence stretched on, unbearable and thick. Then, without warning, one of the cadets, a towering muscle-bound Ythar named Kalos, stepped forward. His voice broke the stillness, harsh and filled with an edge of disbelief. This cannot be," he muttered, his tone trembling with disbelief. "How could a human—" Best him. We've trained for years, bled for every ounce of power. And she did it with a single move? The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown to the wind. The rest of the cadets shifted uncomfortably. Ellie had just shattered everything they thought they knew. The apex commander, the paragon of their species' strength, was reduced to nothing more than a humbled, beaten warrior. Zorath's chest heaved with barely contained rage. He refused to be the subject of mockery, to let these cadets believe. He had been bested by a human. With a swift movement he straightened, his eyes blazing with fury. This human, Zorath growled, his voice thick with contempt, has not bested me. She was lucky. And if any of you think she is a challenge, I will show you just how wrong you are. But his words fell flat, swallowed by the oppressive silence. Even as he spoke, Zorath couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Ellie had seen. Through him. She hadn't overwhelmed him with strength, she had outmaneuvered him, used his own momentum against him. The realization was still settling, and it made him feel weak. Something no apex commander should ever feel. Ellie took a step forward, her eyes still fixed on him. Luck doesn't factor into strategy, Zorath, she said, her voice calm, precise. You may be fast, strong, and full of energy, but you lack what makes a true fighter. Control. Her words hung in the air, more cutting than any weapon. Zorath flinched but quickly masked it with a sneer. Control? He scoffed. You speak of control, yet you're still a mere human. What could you possibly understand about true power? Ellie didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze to the cadets who were watching, their faces a mixture of curiosity, doubt, and now, respect. They had come to watch the great Zorath crush this human, but instead, they had witnessed something entirely different. If power is all that matters, Ellie said slowly, her voice carrying through the hall, then you will never understand what it takes to win. True power isn't about how much strength you can wield. It's about knowing when to use it and, more importantly, how. Zorath's fists clenched in rage, but before he could speak again, Ellie addressed the room. To all of you, she said, her eyes sweeping over the cadets who had been standing silently until now. I don't expect you to understand. I didn't expect to be here in the first place, but I will show you something. I will show you why humans have survived for so long, even when all the odds were against us. The cadets were still, absorbing her words like a new truth, a foreign concept that didn't quite fit with the perfection they had been raised to believe in. Zorath's rage still smoldered, but it was clear now that something had shifted. Something inside of him was being questioned, something that had never been questioned before. His whole life he had been taught that strength was everything, that superiority was inherent. But Ellie, she had shown him something else. The apex commander narrowed his eyes, weighing his options. He could launch himself at her again, unleash everything he had, and obliterate this human threat once and for all. But something told him that wouldn't solve anything, not anymore. Instead, Zorath's expression hardened, his pride still wounded but his mind working furiously. He raised his hand, signaling for the room to settle down. I will not make the same mistake twice, he said, his voice low and dangerous. But know this, you have not seen the last of me, and next time it will be different. Ellie didn't flinch. I'll be ready, she said simply, her voice cool and unwavering. Zorath turned and stalked away, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. The cadets watched him go, but they didn't immediately turn their attention back to Ellie. There was something different in the air now, something unspoken. As the room gradually came alive again, the instructors stepped forward, their expressions unreadable. They had seen the power of the Apex Dominion firsthand, but they had never witnessed a human so unshakable, so unyielding. Ellie Carson had just proven that she wasn't just a survivor. She was something far more dangerous. And no one, not even Zorath, knew what kind of force they had just unleashed into their midst. This continuation adds to the growing sense of intrigue around Ellie's silent strength, while showing how her actions have begun to fracture the perception of the Apex Commander's invincibility. The cadets are now questioning everything they've believed, And Ellie's place in the galaxy, far from being a mere human curiosity, becomes much more significant. The days following Ellie's confrontation with Zorath were heavy with change. The once predictable hierarchy of the Apex Dominion's training program began to feel less certain. No one spoke openly about the event. The pride of the Dominion's cadets was far too fractured for open discussion. Yet whispers filled the halls. Whispers of a human who had defeated their greatest warrior with nothing more than calm precision. It didn't take long before the others started to avoid Ellie. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something deeper. Unease. Respect, but cloaked. In the old arrogance of the Apex cadets, too proud to acknowledge a human superiority. Ellie was nothing if not silent in the face of it all, walking through the corridors as though nothing had changed. The days passed in silence for Ellie. She participated in drills, passed the various tests with near-flawless precision, and ignored the side glances and murmurs. It was the silence that gave her power. She didn't speak. She let her actions do the talking. It was the way she moved, the way she saw the patterns in combat that unsettled her peers. But one morning, that silence would be broken. Ellie was summoned to the commandant's office, a high-ranking instructor responsible for overseeing the cadet program. She'd never been called before, and the fact that it came now after her defeat of Zorath was telling. Her palms didn't sweat. She didn't feel a single moment of nervousness. Instead, she felt curious. The commandant was no fool. She had proven herself in ways no one, not even Zorath, had expected. When she entered the commandant's office, she was met with a stillness more intense than any room she had entered before. The commandant, a tall alien with translucent skin and shifting, iridescent eyes, stood behind a desk piled with holographic data streams, his back turned toward her. "You're wondering why you're here," the commandant said without turning around. His voice was smooth, almost melodic, and far too calm for the situation. Ellie didn't respond. The commandant finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You've caused quite a stir, Cadet Carson. A human, defeating Zorath. You've broken the unspoken rule of this training facility. The Apex are the superior warriors, there are no exceptions. And yet, you've become one. You've gained the respect of your peers despite yourself." Ellie raised an eyebrow, though her gaze never wavered. "I didn't seek anyone's respect. I only want to survive." The commandant's lips curled slightly, but there was no amusement behind it. Instead, his expression darkened. "Survive? You're more than a survivor, Cadet. You've become a symbol of something we don't fully understand. Your quiet defiance, your precision, it's something our warriors are not used to facing. It's discomforting." "Good," Ellie said simply, "because I'm not here to make anyone comfortable." The commandant stepped forward, leaning on the desk. His eyes glowed with an unsettling light. "You're stronger than you seem. You've outperformed every cadet here. You've beaten Zorath, not through power, but through something else. Something the Apex didn't count on." Ellie's eyes narrowed. "What are you getting at?" "Your presence here. It's disturbing," the commandant said, his tone now a little sharper. "The Apex Dominion prides itself on the superiority of our species. We pride ourselves on being the ultimate warriors. We don't need another anomaly upsetting the order." Ellie remained quiet. She didn't need to speak. The commandant's words were clear. She had disrupted the Dominion's carefully constructed narrative of invincibility. "You are an anomaly, Cadet Carson," the commandant continued, stepping closer. "And anomalies are dangerous. We need to know what you are capable of, what you are really made of." Ellie stood her ground. "I'm made of the same thing every human is. I'm made of survival." The commandant paused for a moment, his glowing eyes studying her. Then, he nodded as though he had come to a decision. "Perhaps we need to put your abilities to the test, again. But this time, there will be no avoiding the consequences." Ellie's heart rate didn't change. Her pulse remained calm. She had known this was coming. They wanted her to prove herself again, to show them that her first victory wasn't a fluke. But this time the stakes would be higher. They would make sure of it. "I'm ready," she said. The commandant's lips twisted into something like a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see if you are." Later that evening, Ellie stood in the center of the training hall, once more. This time she wasn't alone. A new figure approached her, a cadet who had been watching her from the sidelines, his expression hard and unblinking. His name was Tyrus, a gifted fighter who had earned his place as one of the Dominion's most promising warriors. He was a seasoned fighter with abilities enhanced by years of brutal training and genetic modification. He stood taller than Zorath, his body a fusion of muscle and raw power, augmented by technology that made him nearly invincible in combat. This would not be the same type of fight. The commandant's voice echoed across the hall. "Cadet Carson, this is your next challenge. Survive him." Ellie didn't flinch. Her eyes never left Tyrus as he raised his arms, readying himself for what was sure to be a vicious battle. This time, however, the stakes were much higher. This time, survival would not come easily. In this continuation, the tension surrounding Ellie's victory grows as she faces an even more powerful opponent, Tyrus. The commandant's motivations become clearer, and Ellie's place within the Apex Dominion takes on even greater significance as she's pushed further. The room is set for a more intense confrontation. The air in the training hall grew thick with anticipation. The heavy clang of boots on metal floors reverberated as Tyrus approached Ellie, his expression hard and unwavering. He was the embodiment of the Dominion's belief in physical superiority. Tall, muscular, his eyes glowing with the cold intensity of a fighter who had faced more than his fair share of battles. Genetic enhancements, cybernetic implants, and brutal training had made him an apex warrior in his own right. This was no longer a fight for honor. It was a test of survival. Ellie stood motionless in the center of the room, a stark contrast to the looming figure before her. Her posture was relaxed, but every muscle in her body was coiled tight. She had faced challenges before, but none like this. The weight of what was at stake was clear now. Her survival wasn't just for herself, it was for the entire human race, for the proof that they could stand tall against the might of the Apex. The commandant's voice echoed from above. "This test will determine if you're truly capable of leading your kind into the future, Cadet Carson. Tyrus is the Dominion's finest. If you can defeat him, you may have proven your place among us, but know this, there are no second chances." Ellie's eyes flickered briefly toward the commandant's booth, but she didn't acknowledge his words. The challenge was clear. No more games. No more subtext. This was the real fight. Tyrus cracked his neck, his jaw tight, and his muscles flexed in anticipation. Without a word, he surged forward, his enhanced limbs moving with inhuman speed. He was a blur, the floor beneath him groaning with the force of his stride. The blow came like a freight train, his fist rocketing toward Ellie's head with enough power to obliterate a lesser opponent. Ellie moved with precision, her body shifting just out of the path of the attack. She felt the heat of his fist as it passed by her, a gust of air and raw energy following in its wake. But she wasn't there to dodge forever. The moment Tyrus's momentum carried him forward, Ellie took her shot. She struck. Her hand found his side, not with brute strength, but with an exacting pinpoint force. A small, seemingly insignificant pressure point, but one that sent a jolt of shock through his body. The cybernetic implants embedded in his muscles locked momentarily, leaving him unable to react in time. Tyrus's body faltered, and Ellie took the opportunity to sweep his legs out from under him. In a seamless motion, she flipped backwards, landing in a crouch as Tyrus hit the floor with a thunderous crash. For a brief moment, there was silence. The crowd of cadets, watching from the edges of the arena, held their breath. Tyrus growled, the sound guttural and primal, and with a swift movement, he was back on his feet, fury burning in his eyes. He wasn't accustomed to being outmaneuvered, let alone so easily. His fists clenched, glowing with the signature pulse of his augmented strength. He lunged again, faster this time, faster than any opponent Ellie had faced. His strikes were ferocious, his movements fueled by a savage rage. Ellie's body moved, with the fluidity of water, evading his attacks with the ease of someone who had spent their life finding the angles others couldn't see. Each dodge was timed with the precision of a heartbeat. But Tyrus was relentless. He wasn't just trying to win now, he was trying to break her. With every punch and kick, he closed the distance between them until Ellie had nowhere left to go. There was a split second where the sheer force of his attack seemed impossible to evade. A backhanded strike came for her side, a blow so fast, so powerful it was almost like a force of nature. But Ellie didn't try to dodge. She didn't need to. In a movement so quick it seemed to blur, she stepped into the strike instead of away from it. With the same precision that had dismantled Zorath, she grasped Tyrus's arm as he swung, using his own force to propel herself forward. She executed a precise shoulder throw, twisting her body in a fluid motion that sent the much larger Tyrus crashing to the floor once more. The room was silent again. Tyrus lay on the ground, breathing heavily, his cybernetic systems whirring and hissing as he tried to push himself up. The rage in his eyes was palpable, but there was something else now, a flicker of respect, even if he wouldn't acknowledge it aloud. Ellie stood poised and unmoved, her body still as though the fight had been nothing more than a brief exercise. Her heart rate remained steady, her focus absolute. She had done it. She had defeated him, not with strength but with strategy. For the first time since she had entered the Apex Dominion, Ellie saw the smallest shift in the air. The cadets, her peers, were watching her differently. Their eyes no longer carried the same arrogance or superiority. In their place was a begrudging admiration. The commandant's voice broke the silence. "Tyrus, get up, this is not over." Tyrus slowly pushed himself up, his cybernetic limbs clicking as he regained his footing. He glared at Ellie, but this time the anger had dulled. There was something else behind his gaze, something closer to recognition. "Get ready," Tyrus muttered, stepping back into a fighting stance. "You've earned this. Let's see if you can survive the next round." Ellie's eyes locked on him, a faint but knowing smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I'm not here to survive. I'm here to win." With that, the fight resumed. But this time, Ellie knew she wasn't just proving herself. She was showing the entire Dominion that the human spirit was a force to be reckoned with. And this fight, this was just the beginning. This continuation builds on the intensity of the battle, demonstrating not only Ellie's skills, but also the shift in perception among the cadets and Tyrus himself. The fight moves from a simple contest of power to one of strategy and survival, as Ellie continues to prove her place in a world that never expected her to succeed. The room crackled with the tension of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. Ellie stood motionless in the center of the arena, her body humming with the aftershocks of the fight. Her heart beat steadily, her breath steady in her chest. She hadn't been bruised or battered, but the mental strain was more taxing than any physical wound could have been. Tyrus had pushed her to her limits, but she had emerged unscathed. For now. Tyrus, now panting and visibly frustrated, stepped back into the center of the ring, his fists still clenched at his sides. He had underestimated her, and the real realization was dawning on him. She wasn't just a human, she was something more. He had tried to overwhelm her with strength and aggression, but she had countered each move with unerring precision. She had broken him, but not in the way he had expected. "You're more than I thought you were, Carson," Tyrus growled, his voice low with begrudging respect. The fight between them was no longer just a contest of strength. It had become something else entirely. Ellie didn't respond immediately. She knew the battle wasn't won yet. The commandant's words echoed in her mind. This is only the beginning. She had survived Tyrus, but the real test was still to come. The commandant's voice boomed over the arena. "Enough. This match has proven that Cadet Carson is capable of handling herself in a fight, but there is one final trial for her to face." Ellie's pulse quickened. The air in the hall seemed to grow even thicker with tension. The cadets, those who had once looked down on her, now watched with a mixture of fear and admiration. They had witnessed the impossible, the human who had beaten Zorath and Tyrus. But the commandant was a creature of pride, and pride, when bruised, demanded an answer. Ellie turned her gaze toward the commandant, who stood with his arms crossed in the observation booth. His eyes glowed coldly as he spoke again. "Cadet Carson," he said, his voice sharp and unwavering. "You've earned the right to face the ultimate test. But be warned, this is not a trial of strength. It's a trial of will, of spirit. You will face an opponent who will test everything you are. No matter what you've faced so far, this is beyond anything you've encountered before." Ellie's mind raced. The apex warrior Zorath, the genetically enhanced Tyrus. Both had been formidable, but there had been a strategy to defeat them. This felt different. Something in the commandant's tone made her think this test would be beyond even her understanding. "Are you prepared, Cadet?" The commandant's eyes glinted with something darker now. A challenge. Ellie nodded slowly, her voice calm. "I'm ready." At that moment, the doors to the arena opened wide, and a figure stepped out into the light. The cadets collectively held their breath. It wasn't another genetically enhanced soldier. It wasn't even another Apex commander. It was a woman, human like Ellie, dressed in the same fatigues but with a grim determination etched into every line of her face. Her eyes locked onto Ellie's with an intensity that almost seemed familiar. Ellie's gut tightened. "Who is she?" Ellie asked, not needing to raise her voice. Her question hung in the air like an echo. The commandant finally spoke again, a small, satisfied smile curling on his lips. "This is Cadet Carson's greatest trial. You'll face your own kind, Ellie, your greatest rival. A woman who has undergone the same training you have, who has experienced what you've endured. Her name is Cadet Rachel Denholm." Ellie's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. Rachel. She had heard the name whispered in the halls, a cadet whose skills were legendary, even among the Dominion's elite. But she had never seen her before. The woman who stood before her now was the embodiment of all the doubts and struggles Ellie had carried with her since she first arrived. Rachel's eyes held nothing but cold resolve as she stepped forward into the arena. There was no recognition in her gaze, just a focused intensity, as though Ellie were nothing more than another obstacle to overcome. This was the ultimate test. A human who had fought through the Dominion's trials. A human who was not just a survivor, but a product of the same system that had tried to break Ellie. The arena seemed to hold its breath. The commandant's voice echoed again, signaling the beginning of the final trial. "This is your trial, Cadet Carson. If you can defeat Rachel, you will have proven yourself not just as a soldier, but as something far greater. The Dominion may never accept you as one of their own, but you will stand as a symbol to your people and a testament to your species. But be warned, Rachel is unlike anything you faced before. She knows you. She has studied your every move. This will be the battle that decides everything." Ellie felt the weight of his words press down on her. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. This was the final trial, the last test of her will, her spirit. The door to the final challenge was now wide open, and the only thing that stood between Ellie and victory was Rachel. "Let's see if you can outlast me, Carson," Rachel said, her voice a low whisper of cold fire. This is where the real battle begins. And with that, the fight began. The moment the doors to the arena slammed shut behind them, Ellie and Rachel stood facing each other in a silence that was as thick as the tension in the air. The weight of the commandant's words echoed in Ellie's mind. This is the battle that decides everything. Rachel didn't move immediately. Her posture was calm but poised, as though every inch of her body was a coiled spring. There was something about her presence, a cold, deliberate confidence, that unnerved Ellie more than she cared to admit. This wasn't the arrogance of Zorath, or the brute aggression of Tyrus. This was different. This was a human who knew the game as well as Ellie did, who had walked the same path, fought the same battles. Their eyes locked, and for a split second, Ellie saw something in Rachel's gaze, a flicker of recognition, not as an enemy but as a fellow human, one who had endured the same crushing weight of being a lone survivor in a system that was never meant to embrace them. Why? Ellie asked, her voice steady but cutting through the silence. Why are you doing this? We're on the same side. Rachel's lips tightened, her eyes narrowing. You really don't get it, do you? She replied, her voice low and measured. I've had to fight for every inch of respect in this place. I'm not here for your pity, Carson. I'm here because I want to prove something. The words stung, but Ellie didn't let it show. She knew Rachel's pain. It was the same pain Ellie had felt when she first set foot in the Dominion. The same frustration that had driven her to break through every obstacle in her way. Rachel wasn't her enemy in the way Zorath or Tyrus had been. No, Rachel was something, far more dangerous, someone who had the same hunger, the same unyielding will, but with the added bitterness of a soldier who had never received recognition. I'm not here to pity you, Ellie said, her tone growing steely. I'm here to win. With that, the fight erupted. Rachel lunged first, a blur of motion, her body moving with the raw, aggressive power of someone who had been trained for combat since childhood. Ellie barely had time to react before Rachel's fist was aimed at her face. The punch came fast, but Ellie saw it coming, a slow-moving, deliberate strike. She sidestepped just in time, her foot sliding on the slick floor as she twisted her body to avoid the blow. But Rachel was relentless. She wasn't trying to land just one strike. She was hammering Ellie with a flurry of calculated moves, each designed to wear her down. Punches, kicks, jabs. All meant to trap Ellie into a corner, to force her into a position where she couldn't escape. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest, but her mind remained clear. She had faced overwhelming odds before. This wasn't just about skill. It was about resilience, about maintaining control of the situation no matter how fierce the attack. She dodged Rachel's strikes with precision, every movement a calculated counter, each dodge an act of grace. Then, it happened. Rachel went for an uppercut, a move that Ellie had seen coming a mile away. But this time, Ellie didn't dodge. She stepped in, using Rachel's own momentum against her. With a fluid motion, Ellie grabbed Rachel's arm, twisting it behind her back in a lock that sent a wave of pain through Rachel's body. Rachel snarled, but Ellie's grip was firm. She could feel the strength in her opponent's muscles, the power that had been honed by years of training. But Ellie didn't flinch. She knew what it took to win this fight. With a swift move, Ellie kicked Rachel's legs out from under her, sending her crashing to the ground with a thud that reverberated through the arena. The crowd, silent until now, let out a collective breath. Ellie stood over her opponent, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Rachel's eyes were wild, a mix of anger and disbelief. I'm sorry, Ellie said softly, her voice cutting through the tension, but this isn't about proving anything to anyone but yourself. You're stronger than this, Rachel. Don't let the system break you. Rachel's hand shot out, grabbing Ellie's arm, pulling herself to a sitting position. You think you've beaten me? She hissed, still defiant despite the exhaustion in her voice. You haven't won, you can't win, we're both just tools for their games. Ellie's heart clenched. There it was. The truth. The cold realization that they were nothing more than pieces on a chessboard, moved by the hand of the Dominion's higher-ups. But it was in that moment that Ellie understood something profound. She wasn't just fighting for her survival anymore. She was fighting for more. Fighting for Rachel, for all the others who had been chewed up by the system and cast aside. I'm not playing their game anymore, Ellie said, her voice steady, resolute. I'm rewriting the rules. Rachel's gaze softened just for a moment, and then without warning she nodded, a small gesture of respect. She knew it was over. The commandant's voice cut through the stillness of the arena, cold and commanding. Enough! The trial is complete. Ellie stood tall, breathing deeply, looking down at Rachel. There was no hatred in her heart, only a quiet understanding. Rachel had fought because that was all she knew, but Ellie had fought for something more, for the future, for humanity, for herself. Ellie had won, not just the battle, but the war inside herself. The arena was silent, but Ellie knew that in that silence, something had changed. The Apex Dominion, for all its strength and power, had just learned what it meant to face a human with nothing left to lose. and everything to fight for.